what if the very thing your parents, your banker, and, your financial advisor all told you was your absolute greatest financial asset?
Yeah.
What if that is actually the exact thing keeping you broke?
I mean, it's a totally terrifying thought.
It really is. Welcome to the deep dive.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are looking at a stack of excerpts from a book that has, well, caused a massive amount of controversy.
Oh, definitely. A huge amount.
Right. But it has also fundamentally shifted how millions of people think about making a living. We're diving into Robert Kiyosaki's financial classic, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Specifically, the introduction and the first two core lessons, right?
Exactly. And our mission for you today is to completely deconstruct the traditional narrative around wealth.
And we really need to deconstruct it because, the goal of this material isn't to hand you a neatly packaged trick for making a quick buck in the stock market.
Right. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme. Not at all. We are looking at a fundamental, almost tectonic shift in psychology. It's the difference in cognitive framing that separates the truly wealthy from the middle class.
Which is so interesting when you actually break it down.
Yeah, because if we look closely at these excerpts, it starts to become very clear why incredibly brilliant professionals like doctors, lawyers, corporate executives, why they often spend their entire lives treading water in an ocean of debt.
While someone with zero formal education can build a dynastic empire.
Exactly.
And that contrast is, well, it's the entire premise of the narrative we've got in front of us. The book drops us into the perspective of a 9-year-old boy, Robert, growing up in Hawaii in the 1950s.
Great.
And he finds himself heavily influenced by two completely different father figures.
The poor dad and the rich dad.
Yeah, but the irony here is that the poor dad is actually the boy's real father. And he isn't uneducated.
No, not at all.
I mean, he is a brilliant academic. He finished his undergraduate degree in less than 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah. He has a PhD. He had full-ride scholarships to Stanford, the University of Chicago, Northwestern. He is the quintessential success story of the traditional education system.
Right. He did everything he was supposed to do.
Exactly. Yet, when he eventually dies, he leaves behind unpaid bills.
Which stands in stark contrast to the rich dad. Who is the father of the boy's best friend, Mike.
Right.
This man never even finished the 8th grade. But he goes on to become one of the wealthiest men in Hawaii. He eventually leaves tens of millions of dollars to charities, his church, and his family.
It's the perfect recipe for cognitive dissonance in a kid. I mean, you have two strong, charismatic, hardworking men who both earn decent money at the time.
Yeah.
But the advice they feed this 9-year-old, it is like listening to two alien species trying to describe the same planet.
The underlying philosophies are entirely opposed.
Yeah.
And it really manifests in their vocabulary.
Sure.
The language they use literally dictates the reality they experience.
The phrasing is absolutely wild when you lay it out side by side. The highly educated poor dad had this deeply ingrained belief that, end quote, the love of money is the root of all evil.
Right.
But the rich dad countered that by saying, the lack of money is the root of all evil.
Such a huge difference.
Totally. The poor dad would tell the kids, study hard so you can find a good company to work for. But the rich dad would say, study hard so you can find a good company to buy.
They even viewed the structure of society completely differently. The poor dad believed that taxes punish those who produce and reward those who don't.
Yeah.
While the rich dad believed taxes are a necessary mechanism to help the less fortunate.
But out of all the notes I took on this, there is one specific contrast that I cannot stop thinking about.
Oh, what's that?
It's how the two men talked about purchasing things they wanted. Whenever the poor dad looked at something expensive, he would just sigh and say, I can't afford it. Period. The sentence is over.
The thought is dead.
Exactly. But the rich dad absolutely forbade those words from being spoken in his house. He demanded that the boy ask a question instead. How can I afford it?
What's fascinating here is the underlying mechanics of what those two different phrases actually do to the human brain.
Tell me more about that.
So the source material argues that when you state, I can't afford it, your brain essentially goes to sleep. You have accepted defeat.
Right.
There is no more cognitive work to be done, so the mind just shuts down. It's It's intellectual laziness masking itself as financial prudence.
Oh, I love that. It's exactly like turning off your computer monitor. You just hit the power button, black screen, nothing is running, nothing is processing.
Totally.
But asking, how can I afford it? That is like piping a complex prompt into a search engine and hitting enter. Suddenly the servers are whirring, the cooling fans kick on, the algorithms are aggressively searching through data. You literally force the machinery of your brain to boot up and hunt for a solution.
That is a great way to look at it. The rich dad was fanatical about exercising the mind.
Yeah.
He viewed the brain as the most powerful computer in the world. And he believed that wealth is not just a pile of cash sitting in a vault. Wealth is the physical manifestation of how a person chooses to process information.
So true.
If proper physical exercise increases your health, then proper mental exercise increases your wealth. The poor dad put his financial brain on the couch every night. The rich dad forced his to run sprints.
And this idea of putting your financial brain on the treadmill, it actually gets put to the test almost immediately in the story. You have to picture this.
Okay, play the scene.
It's 1956 in a Hawaiian sugar plantation town. Robert and his buddy Mike are 9 years old, and they attend the same public school as the kids from the incredibly wealthy plantation families.
Right.
One day, a rich kid named Jimmy invites a bunch of classmates to his family's beach house, but purposefully excludes Robert and Mike because, quote, they were poor kids.
Which is just a brutal reality check for a 9-year-old. But rather than just accepting it, it sparks this immense entrepreneurial fire in them, even if it is a bit misguided at first.
Misguided is an understatement. It's hilarious. They ask Robert's highly educated dad how to get rich, and he just gives them this vague advice. Use your head, make money.
So they take him literally.
They completely take him literally. They go door to door collecting hundreds of used lead toothpaste tubes from all their neighbors. They hoard this massive stash, and then they melt the lead down in a steel pot over a glowing, red-hot hibachi grill in the driveway.
An incredibly dangerous setup for 2 little kids, by the way.
Unbelievably dangerous. So they take this bubbling molten lead and pour it into like plaster of Paris molds that they made out of school milk cartons.
Wow.
And Robert's dad comes home to find the driveway covered in white plaster powder and his kid operating a makeshift smelting plant. He breaks open one of the plaster molds and a perfectly cast lead nickel falls out.
They literally thought making money meant forging U.S. currency.
Yeah. Yes. The poor dad has to sit them down and explain that counterfeiting is a federal crime. But he doesn't crush their spirit. He praises their creativity.
Right, he's supportive.
Yeah, but because he freely admits that he has no idea how to actually build wealth, he points them toward Mike's dad, the rich dad, who apparently has a reputation at the local bank for being a financial genius.
So the boys managed to score a meeting with Rich Dad. And he's an imposing, busy guy. He doesn't offer to tutor them at a desk.
Yeah.
He gives them a brutal take-it-or-leave-it apprenticeship offer. He says, you work for me, I'll teach you. But the terms are ridiculous.
Totally ridiculous.
He makes these 9-year-olds dust canned goods in one of his convenience stores. It's an open-air superette, sweltering hot, no air conditioning, and because the doors face the parking lot, cars are constantly kicking up dirt that coats the shelves.
Sounds miserable.
It was, and they had to do this for 3 hours every single Saturday morning for 10 cents an hour.
30 cents a week. I mean, in 1956, that barely bought 3 comic books.
But
after 3 weeks of this, Robert is furious. He's missing his Little League games, he's covered in dust, and he feels totally exploited. He demands a meeting with Rich Dad to ask for a raise, fully intending to quit.
Which is fair.
Right. When he gets in the room, he unloads on this grown man. He calls him a crook, accuses him of greed, and says he is illegally exploiting child labor. Wait, I have to jump in here.
Go for it.
So what does this all mean? If you are a mentor, your job is to teach. Deliberately underpaying a child for manual labor just feels like hazing. Why wouldn't he just sit them down in an office, draw a chart, and explain how a business works?
Well, because an office lecture doesn't trigger the emotional response he needed them to feel. Rich Dad calmly lets the kid yell, and then points out that Robert sounds exactly like most of the adult employees working in his stores.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He explains that life doesn't teach you by lecturing you at a chalkboard. Life teaches you by pushing you around. And every single time life pushes you, it's saying, wake up, there's something you need to learn here.
But most people just push back blindly, right? They don't look for the lesson.
Exactly. When life pushes adults around in the form of, say, low pay, inflation, or terrible working conditions, They react purely on emotion.
Right.
They get angry at their boss, they demand a minor raise, or they quit and go look for another job that they mistakenly think will solve the underlying problem.
Without changing anything else.
Yeah. They don't realize that their lack of financial education is the actual problem. Rich Dad introduces this concept as the rat race.
Which is a term we throw around a lot today, but the mechanism behind it in this book is very specific.
It is deeply psychological. The rat race is the endless loop of getting up, going to work, paying bills, getting up, going to work, paying bills.
Over and over.
And Rich Dad explains that this entire mechanism is fueled by two fundamental human emotions, fear and greed. First, the fear of not having money wakes you up. It pushes you out of bed and into the office.
And once you get that paycheck in your hand, the fear temporarily subsides, and the second emotion kicks in.
Yes, greed or desire. You look at the money and you start imagining what it can buy. Yeah. The new car, the vacation, the bigger television.
Oh, I've been there.
We all have. You spend the money to satisfy the desire, the money disappears, the fear returns, and the loop resets. It's like a donkey dragging a heavy cart, mindlessly chasing a carrot dangling from a stick held by its rider.
That is such a vivid image.
The donkey thinks it's moving toward a reward, but it's just chasing an illusion that keeps it pulling the cart.
That is a bleak picture of adulthood. But the way Rich Dad teaches them to break this cycle of fear and greed is even crazier than the 10 cents an hour.
Oh yeah, he takes it a step further.
He tells them to go back to work dusting cans in the sweltering store for 0 cents an hour. They have to work for absolutely nothing.
It is a brilliant, albeit really harsh, psychological intervention. By removing the paycheck entirely, he is forcing their brains to sever the emotional dependency on working for a wage.
Right, because if you are desperate for a paycheck, your vision narrows. You become blind to other ways of generating wealth because you are hyper-focused on the 30 cents.
And amazingly, the intervention works. After a couple weeks of working for free, the boys are just kind of hanging around the store.
Yeah.
Because they aren't obsessing over getting paid at the end of their shift, their peripheral vision opens up. They notice something they'd walked past 100 times before. They see the store manager, Mrs. Martin, cutting the top halves of the covers off unsold comic books.
I love this transition. Can you break down exactly what they discovered here?
Sure. So Mrs. Martin was cutting the top halves of the covers to return to the comic distributor for credit, proving they didn't sell.
Okay.
But she was throwing the rest of the actual readable comic book into a cardboard box destined for the trash. Because the boys' minds were no longer clouded by the pursuit of a wage, they saw an asset sitting in the garbage.
That's incredible.
Right. They asked the distributor if they can keep the bottom halves. He agrees, with one strict condition: they cannot resell them.
So they don't. They take over a spare room in Mike's basement and open a neighborhood comic book library.
The business model is incredibly sharp for a couple of kids.
It really is. They charge the neighborhood kids 10 cents for admission. Now, 10 cents is the cost of buying one brand new comic book. But for that same dime, a kid can sit in Mike's basement for 2 straight hours and read 5 or 6 comics.
It is an undeniable value proposition for the customer.
Totally. And because Mike and Robert are still in school, they hire Mike's studious older sister for $1 a week to be the librarian. She takes attendance, enforces the rules, makes sure nobody smuggles a comic out in their shirt.
Nice.
After paying her salary, Mike and Robert are netting $9.50 a week in pure profit.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the exact moment everything changes. The boys have stopped working for money and have successfully engineered a system where money works for them.
It's the difference between manually turning a crank and building an engine.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, think about it. When they were dusting cans, they had to physically be there, tuning the crank with their own sweat to get a few pennies to drop out. If they stopped turning, the pennies stopped.
Exactly.
But the comic book library is an engine. It runs on its own. They are making that $9.50 a week even when they aren't physically standing in the basement. They transition from being employees to being owners.
And Rich Dad uses this victory to explain that money is, ultimately, an illusion. It is a shared fiction held together by confidence and the ignorance of the masses.
Wow.
True wealth doesn't come from begging a boss for a bigger paycheck. It comes from training your mind to see the invisible, to spot the opportunities that everyone else walks right past because they are too terrified of losing their job security to look around.
So they learn how to spot an opportunity and make money. But we need to transition to the second half of this equation because making the money is only step 1.
Right.
To explain step 2, The text brings up a famous historical anecdote from 1923 at the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago.
This is a really vital piece of context. In 1923, a group of the world's most powerful and wealthy businessmen held a meeting at that hotel. We are talking about the heads of massive independent steel companies, the presidents of international banks, the leaders of utility monopolies.
The tighteners of industry.
These were the men who essentially built modern America.
But the book points out that 25 years later, by 1948, the fate of these specific men was catastrophic.
Very much so.
Several of them died completely broke, living on borrowed money. Some went insane, some went to prison. Which is wild because you'd think guys running international monopolies would be immune to that kind of collapse.
You really would.
How does someone who knows how to make millions of dollars end up penniless?
Well, they end up penniless because making money and keeping money require two completely different skill sets.
Oh, that makes sense.
The Titans at the Edgewater Beach Hotel understood corporate expansion and revenue generation, but they suffered from a fatal lack of personal financial literacy. And this is where the author fiercely critiques the traditional educational system.
Right.
Our schools were largely modeled during the agrarian and industrial ages to produce compliant, hardworking employees. They teach you how to read, write, and perform a profession to generate income.
But they teach you absolutely zero about cash flow management, what to do with the money once it actually hits your bank account.
And without that financial literacy, any wealth you build is incredibly fragile.
Exactly. The bedrock of financial literacy, according to Rich Dad, comes down to rule number 1. He calls it the only rule you really need to know. You must intimately understand the difference between an asset and a liability. And you must spend your life buying assets.
Keep it super simple.
The book calls this the KISS rule, yeah.
Fine.
Which sounds great, but how does the book actually define them? Because I know accountants have highly complex definitions for these terms.
The beauty of Rich Dad's definition is that it ignores complex accounting jargon and focuses entirely on the physical direction of the cash flow.
Okay, so keeping it simple.
Exactly. An asset is quite simply something that puts money in your pocket. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. That is it.
So like stocks that pay dividends, bonds, income-producing real estate, intellectual property royalties, those put money into your pocket every month without your physical labor. Therefore, they are assets.
Precisely.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I have to stop you right there, because this is the exact moment in the book where people usually throw it across the room.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Based on that definition of cash flow, the author looks straight at the average middle-class family and says, your primary residence, your house, is not an asset. Your house is a liability.
And you can practically hear the collective gasp of the middle class when they read that.
Of course they gasp. I mean, my house is my biggest investment. It builds equity over time. I can sell it later for more than I bought it for. How can you possibly look at the cornerstone of the American dream and call it a liability?
This raises an important question, though. You have to ask yourself, who is actually looking at the daily numbers? People get caught up in the emotional concept of equity that might materialize decades in the future.
Yeah.
But the text argues that words don't define an asset. The numbers dictate reality. If you look at the cash flow of a home you live in, what is money actually doing right now?
Well, money is leaving. You have a massive mortgage payment,
Right.
property taxes, homeowners insurance, constant maintenance, utilities.
Exactly. The cash is flowing out of your pocket every single month. It requires constant feeding. By the strict definition of cash flow, that makes it a liability.
All right.
Now, the text isn't saying you should live in a tent on the street. It acknowledges that owning a home is generally better than nothing. But treating your personal residence as your primary investment vehicle is a massive trap.
Because it ties up all your resources.
Yes, it creates a severe liquidity trap and an enormous opportunity cost. The book details 3 massive hidden losses of buying too much house early in life instead of buying true assets. First, there is the loss of time.
Right, because the decades you spend paying down a 30-year mortgage is time where that same money could have been compounding at a much higher rate in something else.
Precisely. Second, there is the loss of capital.
Because you are pouring all your spare cash into a new roof or a kitchen remodel or property taxes instead of deploying that capital into the stock market or a business.
And third, which the author argues is the most insidious, the loss of investment education. Because a family has all their wealth trapped inside the drywall of their house, they never have liquid capital to actually play the market.
Oh, wow.
Because they have no money to invest, they never gain the real-world experience required to become sophisticated investors. They just play it safe. They conform to what everyone else is doing.
That conformity aspect is huge. Why do we all blindly accept that a massive house is the ultimate goal if the math says it keeps us broke?
The author ties this beautifully into a Japanese legend. The legend states that there are three great powers in the world.
Okay.
The power of the sword, representing military might and weaponry. The power of the jewel, representing money and status. And the most treasured of all, the power of the mirror, which represents self-knowledge.
I really love this framework.
It cuts right to the core of human behavior. The text argues that the middle class perpetually struggles because they let the power of the jewel, the desire for status and money, control them.
Right.
They completely ignore the power of the mirror. Instead of looking in the mirror and asking, does taking on this massive mortgage and buying this huge house actually make mathematical sense for my financial independence? They act out of fear.
The fear of standing out, the fear of not looking successful to their neighbors.
Yes. The fear of ostracism is a powerful psychological force. It causes people to conform to popular dogma without ever questioning the math.
They just do what everyone else does.
Yeah. They mindlessly repeat the mantras they've been fed. Get a safe job. Your home is your biggest asset. Get a bill consolidation loan to pay off your credit cards. They are terrified of looking in the mirror and realizing they might need to forge a completely different path than their peers.
Wow. We have really dug into the mechanics of this today. We started with two 9-year-old boys in Hawaii, covered in white plaster, literally melting lead over a driveway hibachi to cast counterfeit nickels.
It's been quite the journey.
It really has. But through the unair-conditioned, brutal lessons of Rich Dad, we saw the underlying mechanism of wealth. We saw how severing the emotional dependency on a paycheck breaks the rat race loop of fear and greed.
Yes.
We saw them transition from manually turning a crank to building an automated economic engine in a basement comic book library.
And we broke down the absolute necessity of financial literacy. The harsh truth that knowing how to make money won't save you if you don't understand cash flow. We looked at the courage it takes to hold up the financial mirror, ignore the crowd, and admit that the massive house society told you was an investment might actually be the very liability draining your wealth.
So as we wrap this up, I want you to take a hard look in your own financial mirror. Look at the actual numbers of your cash flow. Are you spending your energy acquiring things that put money into your pocket while you sleep? Or are you acquiring things that constantly drain your bank account, simply because society told you to call them assets?
And I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder, building on the mechanics we've explored today.
Let's hear it.
The text is adamant that our school system was designed in a bygone era to produce obedient, specialized employees, not visionary owners. But look at the trajectory of the world right now.
Yeah, it's changing fast.
We are accelerating into an era of unprecedented technological disruption. With the rise of AI and robotics, the traditional, specialized, safe job is evaporating. So what happens to a society that has been trained for generations only to be employees when the economy no longer requires their labor?
That is a terrifying thought.
How will the next generation survive if their only skill is trading their time for a paycheck that constantly shrinks against inflation, rather than knowing how to build and own assets? If you are still relying entirely on an employer to dictate your financial reality, what happens when that reality simply ceases to exist?
That's a question worth booting up your mental computer to answer.